Have you ever felt distant, even when someone is holding you close? This question is more than a poetic paradox. It is a key that unlocks a fundamental truth of the human experience. That chilling sense of isolation within intimacy is the ghost in the machine of our social selves, a silent alarm signaling a fracture in the invisible architecture that binds us. It is the profound understanding that connection is not a matter of proximity, but of resonance, a frequency that two hearts must mutually choose to broadcast and receive. An embrace, the most universal symbol of closeness, can become its opposite, a cage of duty, a theater of conflict, or a silent monument to everything left unsaid. This is the anatomy of the empty embrace, a phenomenon that haunts our bedrooms, our dinner tables, and as we will see, the very fabric of our civic life. The concept of emotional connection is the bedrock upon which civilization is built. It is the silent, shared language of a knowing glance between partners, the effortless sync of old friends, finishing each other's sentences, the unspoken trust that allows us to walk down a street, surrounded by strangers. It is the glue of society and the fuel of love. Physical intimacy, in its ideal form, is meant to be the purest, most wordless expression of this connection, a sacred space where vulnerability is offered and met with safety, where presence is everything. But this is the ideal. The reality is a complex and often painful landscape. An embrace can become a performance, a habit, a weapon, or a lie. It can be a place where bodies touch but hearts are barricaded behind walls of past hurt and present fear, where the very act meant to provide comfort instead amplifies a deep existential loneliness. This is the empty embrace, a meticulously crafted performance of closeness, where the core element, the genuine, reciprocal flow of understanding, is conspicuously and often tragically absent. This experience of emotional emptiness in relationships is a silent global epidemic, the kind we often suffer alone, mistakenly believing we are the only one. It's not just the couple in a sexless marriage, it's the couple for whom sex is a transaction, a way to maintain the facade of normalcy, or to quiet for a few moments the aching void of incomprehension. It's the parent who provides their child with every material advantage except the one that matters most, their full, undistracted, emotionally present attention. It's the friendship that persists for decades out of sheer inertia, where conversations are elaborate dances around the weather, work and pop culture, forever avoiding the deep cold waters of personal fear, unfulfilled hope, and silent regret. This emptiness doesn't occur in a vacuum. It is cultivated. The relentless busyness of modern life provides a perfect, socially acceptable shield against vulnerability. Unvoiced resentments accumulate, not in dramatic explosions, but in the quiet daily laying of bricks that slowly builds an impenetrable wall between two people. We fall prey to the catastrophic, child-derived assumption that our loved ones are mind readers, and we would rather starve emotionally, nursing a quiet fury that they haven't noticed our hunger, than voice our simple, terrifying need to be held, heard, or reassured. We consistently choose the cold comfort of the familiar, dysfunctional pattern over the terrifying unknown risk of authentic connection. To truly dissect this emptiness, we must venture deep into the psychological machinery that governs how we love, fight, and connect. Our attachment styles, the blueprints for intimacy drawn in the furnace of our earliest childhood relationships, dictate the entire dance of our adult connection. The anxiously attached individual might cling tighter in an embrace, their grip fueled by a deep-seated fear of abandonment, their neediness a self-fulfilling prophecy that pushes the other person away, creating a vacuum of unmet expectations and reinforcing their core wounds. The avoidantly attached individual might be physically present, but emotionally light years away, their body rigid in a hug, their mind already planning an exit strategy to avoid the perceived threat of engulfment and loss of self. They are masters of building fortresses around their hearts, mislabeling isolation as independence. Furthermore, communication, or the toxic, destructive mimicry that often passes for it, becomes the primary artillery in this cold war of connection. We engage in kitchen sinking, hurling every past grievance and unrelated complaint into a present argument, ensuring no single issue can ever be resolved. We practice destructive mind reading, assuming we know our partner's malicious intentions and reacting with fury to our own invented narrative instead of the complex, flawed human before us. We stonewall, retreating behind a stony, impenetrable silence that is louder and more damaging than any scream. This creates a feedback loop of profound misunderstanding and pain, where silence and conflict become the only familiar grounds, yet they are grounds upon which no relationship can ever truly thrive, only endure its own prolonged atrophy. Now let us take this intricate, deeply personal concept out of the quiet, private theaters of our homes, and project it onto the grand, harsh, and unforgiving stage of a public confrontation. The story of 20-year-old Samantha Alonzo Luna is far more than a viral news clip about police brutality or youthful defiance. It is a shocking, literal, and brutally honest exposition of the empty embrace, played out not between lovers, but between citizens and between individual identity and institutional power. The scene is set under the ancient, indifferent gaze of the Northern California redwoods near Humboldt State University. A car is pulled over. The air is already thick with the inherent low-grade tension that exists in the space where individual freedom intersects with institutional authority. The initial infraction is almost laughably minor, a moment of pure youthful exuberance, a friend sticking her head out of the sunroof to feel the wind, a tiny rebellion against being contained. But in this interaction, there is no bandwidth for context, for humor, for shared humanity. The law in this moment is a binary switch, on or off. The friend is arrested. For Luna, this is an immediate and visceral fracture in her reality. Her friend is being absorbed into a system she fears, distrusts, and likely perceives as inherently hostile. For the officers, this is procedure. This is Tuesday. The emotional disconnect is instantaneous, absolute, and mutually reinforcing. The dialogue that follows is a masterclass in failed communication, a perfect, tragic case study of two parties speaking entirely different languages from behind their respective fortified walls. The police officer, armored in the script of her training, the weight of her badge, and the societal mandate of her role, communicates in the blunt instrument of ultimatum. Her language is designed to establish and maintain control, not to forge understanding. You're about 2 seconds from going to jail for public intoxication. I would stop talking if I were you. This is not an invitation for dialogue, it is a command for compliance. It is the language of rigid, enforced avoidancy, emotionally distant, focused on maintaining boundaries and hierarchy at all costs, prioritizing order over all other human considerations. Luna, on the other hand, is pure, unvarnished, anxious, preoccupied attachment in a crisis. She is operating from a perfect storm of emotion, fierce loyalty to her friend, a deep-seated fear of the police, a profound and visceral sense of injustice, and the amplifying effects of alcohol. Her response is not to the legal procedure, but to the emotional slight and the perceived power imbalance. I'm sorry that you're the one that's being rude. How am I being rude? This is a classic projection of blame and a plea for recognition of her perspective, defense mechanisms that immediately shut down any remaining sliver of potential for de-escalation. She is speaking the language of raw, wounded emotion to someone who is only programmed to hear challenge and defiance. They are on two different planets in two different emotional universes, and neither possesses the tools or the will to build a bridge. They are primed for collision. What happens next is the inevitable, violent culmination of this total and absolute emotional disconnect. The physical struggle is the ultimate, perverted, empty embrace. When Luna grabs the officer's hair and refuses to let go, it is not a calculated act of strategic resistance. It is a desperate, primal, and pathetic act of trying to assert control in a situation where she feels utterly powerless and invisible. It is the physical manifestation of clinging anxiety, a terrifying literalization of the phrase, "I won't let you go," when the letting go is inevitable. The officer's response to have her hair cut off is one of the most powerfully symbolic acts of severance imaginable. It is the ultimate rejection of connection, a literal cutting of the last violent tie that binds them. It is a final brutal declaration. I would rather remove a part of myself than remain connected to you in this way. This is an embrace in only the most technical, horrifying sense. Their bodies are entangled in a savage struggle for dominance, but their humanity is utterly absent from the fight. Security expert Steve Carndine's analysis, while legally pristine, is emotionally and psychologically sterile, even if the police officers were wrong. She has no right to resist arrest. He is correct on the letter of the law, but the law is a dull instrument that cannot measure the depth of human despair, the weight of historical context, or the catastrophic totality of the failure of connection that leads to such a desperate, tragic moment. This jarring public spectacle holds up a distorted, magnified mirror to our private lives and reveals the key, transformative insight we must all internalize. The only antidote to the empty embrace, whether in the intimacy of love, the complexity of friendship, or the fraught dynamics of civic life, is the courageous, conscious, and consistent practice of emotional vulnerability and the active, relentless pursuit of genuine connection. Vulnerability is not capitulation, it is the highest form of strength and strategy, because it requires immense courage and emotional intelligence. For the police officer, genuine connection in that moment would have required professional de-escalation of the highest order, a superhuman but necessary exercise in empathy, to see the terrified, emotionally dysregulated young woman behind the defiant words to acknowledge her concern for her friend, without conceding legal authority. It would require the vulnerability to step slightly outside the rigid script of authority and into the messy realm of shared humanity. For Lou, vulnerability would have meant the incredible strength of emotional regulation, swallowing her pride and her rage in the moment, understanding that her true power lay in her phone's camera, in witness testimony, and in fighting the incident in the courtroom, not in a physical struggle she was destined to lose. It would mean being vulnerable to the reality of the power dynamic rather than clinging to the ideal of how it should be. Neither chose vulnerability. Both retreated behind their well-fortified armor, the armor of the badge and the armor of righteous indignation. The result was pain, humiliation, criminal charges, and a subsequent lawsuit that merely continues the same fundamental conflict on a different, more bureaucratic battlefield, almost certainly with the same profound emotional disconnect that started it. Her smiling mugshot is not a sign of joy but the ultimate symbol of this disconnect, a mask of defiance hiding shame, confusion, and a story she herself likely cannot fully process. In summary, the journey from an empty embrace to a fulfilling connection demands a revolution of emotional awareness. It requires us to recognize that the chasms that open between us, in our homes, our friendships, and on our streets, are not preordained. They are carved by a mutual, often unconscious fear of being truly seen in our imperfect humanity. They are widened when we replace curious, compassionate communication with defensive, destructive ultimatums, when we choose the sterile safety of being right over the vulnerable, messy risk of being connected. The distance we feel in an embrace, whether wanted or forced, is a chasm we co-create through action and inaction, but this also means it is a chasm we, with immense courage, empathy, and a commitment to a new way of being, have the power to bridge. The story of Samantha Luna is a public tragedy of disconnection. It serves as a stark warning of what happens when we systematically forget the human on the other side of the embrace, and a powerful reminder that the most radical and important thing we can ever do for our partners, our children, our friends, and our society is to have the bravery to truly show up, vulnerably, honestly, and completely, and to fill the space between us with the courage to connect. This conversation is merely a beginning. The dynamics of human connection and disconnection are the central story of our lives. We have only scratched the surface. Now we turn to you. Your story is a vital data point in understanding this human experience. Have you ever experienced a moment, public or intensely private, where you felt a terrifying existential disconnect from someone you should have felt close to? How did you navigate that turbulent emotional terrain? What did you learn about yourself and the nature of connection? Your experience matters. Share your stories and insights in the comments below. Let's learn from each other and build a living dialogue around forging more authentic, courageous connections. And for a deeper dive into the complexities of the human heart, from navigating attachment styles and mastering the art of vulnerable communication, to understanding the psychology of power and conflict, please explore our other videos on the channel.
This profound disconnection is not merely an interpersonal failure. It is a societal symptom, a reflection of a world increasingly optimized for transactional efficiency over relational depth. We have built systems that prize speed over presence, metrics over meaning, and curated digital personas over messy, authentic selves. The empty embrace is the physical manifestation of this collective drift, a silent protest of the human spirit against a culture that often asks us to show up as hollowed-out versions of ourselves, performing roles rather than living truths. It is the inevitable result when the architecture of our daily lives, from the design of our workplaces to the algorithms that mediate our social interactions, incentivizes disconnection, rewarding the superficial and punishing the slow, deliberate, and vulnerable work of true relating. Consider the digital echo of the empty embrace, the endless scroll of social media, where we consume the highlight reels of others' lives while feeling increasingly isolated in our own unshared realities. We exchange likes and comments, a pantomime of engagement that often lacks the substance of a single sustained empathetic glance across a room. We maintain hundreds of connections while quietly starving for a single one that feels real, one that can sit with us in our silence and our struggle without the need to curate, optimize, or perform. This digital landscape trains us in the very habits that poison intimacy: comparison, performance, and the constant low-grade anxiety of being perceived without ever being truly known. It is a training ground for emotional avoidancy, teaching us to skim the surface of human experience rather than diving into its beautiful, terrifying depths. Therefore, healing the empty embrace requires more than individual courage. It demands a cultural recalibration. It calls for a conscious rewiring of our priorities, both personally and collectively. We must become architects of new systems in our families, our communities, and our institutions that actively foster presence. This means creating tech-free zones in our homes where conversation can flourish unchallenged by notifications. It means championing leadership that values emotional intelligence as highly as intellectual acumen. It means reimagining civic institutions like law enforcement, not as blunt instruments of control, but as services fundamentally oriented toward de-escalation, protection, and yes, connection. The goal is to build a world where vulnerability is not seen as a liability, but as the cornerstone of resilience, innovation, and trust. The path forward is one of intentional practice. It is the daily, mundane, and heroic choice to put down the phone and ask a real question. It is the practice of active listening, not to formulate a response, but to truly understand the human being speaking. It is the courage to say, "I'm hurting" or "I need you," instead of waiting in resentful silence for someone to read our mind. It is the wisdom to recognize our own attachment patterns and take responsibility for how they impact our interactions, seeking to understand rather than to be understood. This is the hard, unglamorous work of building bridges across the chasms we have inherited and those we have helped to create. Samantha Luna's story, in its brutal publicness, offers us an invaluable gift, a clear, uncompromising look at the end point of a path we are all walking down to some degree. It shows us the logical conclusion of a society that has forgotten how to talk, how to listen, and how to see the humanity in the eyes of the other, whether that other is a loved one or a stranger in a uniform. It is a cautionary tale written in the language of violence and severed hair, but its message is one of profound peace. It tells us that the only way out of the cycle of empty embraces is through the gateway of our own vulnerability. The embrace, empty or full, begins and ends with us. The choice to resonate, to truly see and be seen, is the most powerful act of rebellion against disconnection we can ever make. It is how we turn the symphony of disconnection into a chorus of belonging. This chorus of belonging, however, requires us to become cartographers of the human heart, mapping not only our own emotional terrain, but also learning to navigate the complex landscapes of others. It asks us to develop a new literacy, an emotional literacy that allows us to decode the silent languages of pain, fear, and longing that often manifest as anger, withdrawal, or indifference. When a partner stonewalls, the emotionally literate response is not to escalate or retreat in kind, but to recognize the behavior as a poorly expressed signal of overwhelm or hurt. It is to understand that the silent treatment is rarely a calculated weapon, but more often a last-ditch fortress, a desperate attempt to self-protect when emotional resources are utterly depleted. This shift in perception from seeing a personal attack to recognizing a distress signal is the fundamental pivot point from conflict to connection. This work extends far beyond our romantic partnership. It is equally critical in our friendships, where the unspoken contract often assumes a stasis that life itself cannot sustain. A true friend in the modern sense is not merely someone with a shared history, but someone with whom we feel permission to evolve. They are a safe harbor where we can share our changing selves, our new fears, our shifting political views, our spiritual awakenings or crises, without the terror of being met with confusion, judgment, or the dreaded phrase, "You've changed." The empty embrace in friendship is the slow, agonizing death of this permission, where both parties choose the preservation of a comfortable, outdated myth over the courageous, uncertain work of reacquaintance. To avoid this, we must ritualize check-ins that go deeper than the superficial, asking questions like, "How is your heart really doing?" and being prepared to listen to an answer that might be messy, complicated, and inconvenient. Furthermore, the principle of the empty embrace provides a crucial lens through which to examine our relationship with work and productivity. For many, a career has become the ultimate performance of a connected life, a constant hustle for recognition, influence, and validation that masks a deep-seated loneliness and a fear of insignificance. We pour ourselves into projects, mistaking busyness for purpose and networking for community. We endure the empty embrace of a corporate culture that speaks of family while treating us as disposable assets, that demands our passion but offers only a paycheck in return. The Great Resignation was not merely a shift in labor markets. It was a mass awakening to the soul-crushing reality of this transactional embrace. People did not just leave jobs, they fled a profound feeling of disconnect, a realization that their humanity had become secondary to their output. The future of work, if it is to be sustainable, must be rebuilt on a foundation of genuine human value, where psychological safety and authentic connection are seen not as perks, but as non-negotiable prerequisites for innovation and well-being. Ultimately, the journey from disconnection to belonging is a spiral, not a line. We will continually circle back to these core challenges throughout our lives, each time with the opportunity to engage with them from a place of slightly greater wisdom and self-compassion. There will be days when we choose the armor, when we retreat behind our walls and contribute to the very chasm we lament, The goal is not perfection but awareness. It is to notice the moment we choose the empty embrace, whether by picking up our phone instead of listening, by offering a platitude instead of empathy, or by assuming the worst instead of asking a curious question, and to forgive ourselves for it. Then in the next moment to make a different choice. The symphony of disconnection has been the background score of our modern existence for too long, but a new score is being written note by note in every kitchen where a difficult conversation is had with love, in every police encounter de-escalated through empathy, in every friendship renewed through vulnerability, and in every moment we dare to believe that the terrifying risk of connection is infinitely preferable to the cold, certain safety of isolation. The instruments are our own courageous heart. The music is waiting to be played. It begins with a single honest note. I am here, I see you. Let's try again.